Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Michael G. Bartlett, who is the Director of Experience Innovation at JMark, who are an IT support and IT services company. He's also the founder of the CCXP exam simulator and, most recently, an author. Hello, Michael. How are you doing?
Hey, Adrian. I'm pretty good. How are you doing today?
I am splendid, sir. Splendid. Now,
good.
Now, for Michael, for the benefit of our listeners, people that are listening to the kind of podcast, or maybe even also the kind of people that are kind of reading the highlights as well as listening into the podcast, can you tell us a little bit about you and a bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, so I suppose I'm the classic generalist. When people used to ask me what I did, I would ramble on for minutes, and then I finally discovered the word generalist, and I'm like, oh, okay, there we go, that's what I do. So I've been around the shop. I've done a whole bunch of different things. I started off as a software programmer, then I was a consultant for Accenture for a while. Then I became a film director for a little bit and a film producer, and have really great experience. If anyone's ever seen the TV series Entourage, I kind of got to experience some of the things that you would see in that TV series, like going to the Cannes Film Festival and signing deals with big sales companies and stuff. It was awesome and kind of inspired my passion for marketing. Actually, that all came from the film business. And then I immigrated from England over to the USA in 2011, and a lot of my British friends were making fun of it and saying, so what are you going to do now then? You're going to become a farmer, Mike? And I was like, come on, guys, it's not that bad out there. And so anyway, I got to Missouri. I am in the more of a rural part in Southwest Missouri. And the only thing really that I could find was a small startup. So I just went to work for those guys and kind of saw the whole startup life cycle, from promising company to getting bought out by investors to running it into the ground. And that kind of got me passionate about business life cycles and kind of the intricacies and the mechanics of what makes a business work and what makes it not work. And that naturally kind of just dovetailed into a passion for customer experience and employee experience. And so I ended up at JMark after a little stint at the local school district. And now I do a number of different things. I incubate startups. So I'm working with the CEO of JMark on incubating a small startup out here. And then I also do the standard CX stuff that most CX professionals do when they work with businesses as well. So a little bit of everything.
Thank you for that. Now, as I said, new author as well, and that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast. Always interested to kind of hear people different takes, how they package up ideas. And you've got this new book that's just come out called The Dark Side of CX, which, I don't know, being a bit of a fan of kind of Star Wars, kind of immediately caught my eye. So it's called The Dark Side of CX: The Costly Patterns That Turn Loyal Customers into Brand Haters. So before we get into it, can you give me a bit of a thumbnail sketch about it and how it came about and its main thesis and also who's it aimed at?
So it came about because there seems to be an increasing amount of research showing that negative experiences are more impactful than positive experiences. And therefore, maybe as customer experience professionals, what we should be doing is looking to get rid of all of the bad parts of customer journeys before we even start thinking about trying to, like make wonderful moments, moments that matter and so forth.
Hallelujah.
And so, yeah, so basically the pattern approach, which is what this book takes, it's been used in other texts. I've never seen it in customer experience before, but I'm a big fan of the game chess. I don't play it so much anymore. I used to play it a lot when I was younger, but I'm fascinated by the field and how it's almost like, when people mine Bitcoin, I feel like you can keep mining chess and you can always find new ideas. If you keep working hard enough, new patterns that bring something to the game. It's like this, even though so much has been explored and learned about the game, there's still so much that is yet to learn, and being able to be someone that could maybe discover something new in the game is exciting to me. And because no one had taken that approach, I thought, well, let's mine the CX field and see if there's any patterns that just come up a lot. And the reason that the patterns are interesting to me is because in chess, we have this idea of something called a priom. It's a Russian word. And what it means is it's a pattern, but it has an associated maneuver as well. So you learn the prioms. Most chess grandmasters know, hundreds, if not thousands of these things. And then when they're playing a game, it kind of shortcuts their decision making, because if they see the pattern, they immediately know the maneuvers they need to take. They don't even need to think about it. Right. So I thought, I wonder if such patterns exist in CX. And if they do, if we could put together some best practices to say, not necessarily all the time, but 80% of the time, maybe, if we follow the Pareto idea, these are the most likely reasons the pattern is caused. And so these are the things that are the most likely to solve the situation. It's not cut and dry. It's not predictable. Customer experience is a complex field. And so you can never say that there are always guaranteed right answers to every problem. But what you can say are, these are the trends in terms of best practices. So if you see this pattern, maybe you should look over here, but still remember to think critically yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Go look at the information, go look at the data, and then make your own informed decision for your business.
Nice. Thank you. That's really interesting. Anyway, we'll come back to the prioms. I was going to ask you about the prioms because I wanted to make sure I got my pronunciation of the word kind of right, because I'd never seen the word before. It's spelled Priome, and I was like, I hope I'm saying that right. Anyway, we'll come back to that in a minute. But to give people a flavor of the book, I mean, I wanted to ask you about a few things that stood out for me. And the first thing, because I think you alluded to this before, and that's why I kind of said hallelujah, the idea that in the book you talk about the need to focus on the moments that shatter rather than the moments that matter. You talk about this idea, because we talked about this underlying psychology of why we should get to the really kind of our base understanding of what's important to us. I mean, I think is that one of the rationales behind this idea about we should focus on the moments that shatter rather than the moments that matter?
Yeah, well, it kind of ties in with the idea that negative experiences are more impactful. You could tell that to somebody, and that's all well and good, and you could even show them the research. But what do they do with that? So what I wanted to do was say, okay, well, let me dive into the psychology behind negative experiences, and if I can show you and kind of almost prove to you why this is happening, why bad experiences are being generated, then maybe it will give the practitioner a better appreciation for that kind of stuff, so that when they come to fix the experiences, and maybe they're having a conversation with somebody and they're trying to make their rationale, they'll be able to back it up with some very useful information that's backed by science. So that's kind of why I decided to take an approach that looks at the psychology first. And I don't expect people to remember it all, because it's not complicated, but there's still something to it. So what I did in the book is I then distilled it down into two basic categories. So I said, bad experiences tend to have one of two components, sometimes actually more often both of them, goal friction and social friction.
Right. That's interesting. Goal friction and social friction. Can you explain the distinction between those two things? Because actually, I know that people talk about friction-free, frictionless, reducing the friction, eliminating the friction, all this sort of stuff, but you're talking specifically about goal friction and social friction. What's the difference?
So goal friction is pretty much the friction that you just described. And Roger Dooley has a whole book on it with the same name as well.
Yeah.
So people can just think of that as you're trying to accomplish a goal and something keeps getting in the way of the goal, slowing you down, making it more difficult, putting obstacles in the way, hiding from you so you can't find the contact us button, all that kind of stuff. This is really irritating. But then I found that there's another kind of friction that happens in the customer experience as well. So that's where, let's say that you want to accomplish a task and you can accomplish it in the most efficient amount of time, but you're still not happy. Okay, so there was no goal friction. So what went wrong? Well, the person talked down to me, or they made a snide remark, or something like that, and that really upsets people as well. So that's where the social friction side comes in, and both of them are the two key components that really contribute to people not having so great experiences.
Okay, that's fascinating. But you also kind of talk about, I mean, to make it kind of almost like more complicated, you also talk about this idea of dark patterns of CX. When I read that, I was like, oh, dark patterns. It reminded me of there's a website called Dark Patterns.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And is that, I mean, because I was going, what did you explain that? Because is that similar to the behavioral digital design dark patterns that emerge, particularly in the digital space?
A little bit. So I see the CX patterns, maybe I'm just being too much of an optimist here, but I see the CX patterns as not being as deliberately manipulative as the ones that you see in the digital space. Most of the ones that I found are just because a number of things have happened. Either the business just didn't design the experience, so they just let it happen organically. And then as a result of all of the different interactions, these bad patterns just happen to surface. It could be because the organization has a lot of organizational debt. So they actually did design a good experience and it was good at one point. But then as the business grew and scaled and naturally became more complex, as businesses become more complex, customer experience typically begins to erode.
Is that because like process and policy hasn't been able to keep up with kind of like the demands of reality in many ways?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And so that's where I see it coming from. So that's really, it's more that, I'm not saying that people have been deliberately manipulative. There may be instances where people do that as well. But I think for the most part, certainly all the bad customer experiences I tend to run into, people just haven't really taken the time to think it through or to proactively audit their experiences and say, how can we fix these? So I think that's really where it comes from, the dark side of CX.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I remember I have this theory that almost like really good experiences and really bad experiences almost are they happen on the edges in many ways.
Yes.
And in actual fact, what happens is that you end up really good ones. You go and you basically should say, thank you very much. That's great. You should try and recognize kind of what went right. And then wherever possible, try and replicate that as much as you possibly can. But then when things go sometimes catastrophically wrong, it generally kind of happens because the organization hasn't stress tested or scenario tested its experience or its process, or its procedures or its operating model, to kind of understand what happens on the edges. Yes. And that's kind of why things people just fall off the edge in many ways. But then, I find that really interesting. But then you can talk about in the book related to that dark patterns, which sometimes are not intentional. There, as you say, it becomes like an organizational debt thing. That these dark patterns just exist. But then you kind of in the book, rather than just stating it, you also go into describe a model that can be used to decode and I guess identify these dark patterns. And I thought that's really interesting because that could give people a really useful way of identifying where they exist in their organization, and also a good place to start, as it were. So I wondered if you could tell us about that kind of model.
Yeah, well, it comes from my frustrations with this little startup that I worked in, where they were scaling so quickly that all of their little little small dark patterns were getting bigger as they scaled, and they were literally playing a game of whack-a-mole. So a problem would happen, and then they would just try and stamp it out. And then what they didn't realize is by doing that, that created another problem because everything's all interrelated. And systems thinking has this model that I really like called the iceberg model. And the idea is that it's very straightforward. It simply says that okay, so something bad has happened. So we need to ask ourselves, has this ever happened before? Is this a pattern that exists in the business? And I'll give you an example in a minute that will show you exactly how this happened, a real world example from this particular company. But basically, yes, okay, we've seen that there's a pattern of events happening. Okay, so why does this pattern continue to happen? Well, how come nobody's addressed it? What's causing it? So then you look at what the pressures are within the organization that allow that pattern to keep on surfacing, structures within the business of some sort. But then you have to say to yourselves, okay, well, what's causing those structures? And then you go one level deeper, you go down the iceberg as it gets bigger and bigger, and it's, well, there's actually mindsets within the business that drive that. So the very specific example that I would give is, I used to work in this team. We were a group of consultants, and one of the things that we would do is it was a healthcare startup. So we had a number of different clients on the cloud, and sometimes we'd need to, import data into them. Maybe we were bringing them over as a new client, and we would take their old data from their old system and move it into the new system. So what we would have to do is, at a scheduled time during the night, we would bring their system down. Then we would transfer the information into their database, and then we would bring the system back up again. However, when filled out the forms to say what needed to happen, because all of the execution happened through a company in India, the client names were 3 letters. So I wasn't saying, this specific client with this name, I want them brought down. I would say, bring client ALX down, and then do this, and then take database ALX and restart it again. And the problem was it was so subject to human error, because I remember I had someone double check my work and triple check my work, and there was still mistakes in there in terms of the letters. The letters would be wrong sometimes. And what actually ended up happening is we had an individual on our team who brought client A's database down, and then he restored client B's database back over the top of client A, which wiped out all of their information. And we got lucky because the Indian company that was in charge of doing the database work had done a backup. Had they not done that backup, it would have been catastrophic, and he probably would have been fired. However, firing the individual was not the right solution. If they'd done that, that wouldn't have fixed the problem. The problem was that the process was completely messed up because it was subject to human error, and it was happening over and over and over again. Okay, so what were the structures that were allowing that? The structures were that there was no automated system in place where you could pick the information and generate the Word document. So I went in and actually did that on the weekend one day to create that myself, because I was sick and tired of the team constantly being at risk from being fired if those mistakes happened. And what was the mentality that drove that structure? No one would ever address it. They were happy to live with the risk and just say, well, you know what, we'll fire someone if something goes wrong. If it had been, we need to make sure this never happens again so that we never have this kind of awful client experience, then the mindset would have said, let's put an initiative together, let's get someone like Mike involved, let's build a system, and then that way we've automated it so that the chances of human error goes right down, and we don't find ourselves in a situation where we just have to randomly fire people. So I just couldn't believe it. It really irritated me, the lack of proactive mentality that was in that organization, and it was one of the big drivers that pushed me to where I am right now.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned systems thinking, and I think that's because I'm a big fan of systems thinking. I mean, and also kind of how we use it to, to better understand problems that we face, because it forces you to look at kind of things. We'll take one. If you follow the sort of the Checkland kind of model, or even just as the John Seddon approach, if you can know who that is, the first thing you have to go do is just go and study.
Yes.
And
observe, yeah.
And observe, to actually just to learn about what's going on. And I think there is a paucity of that in many businesses, in that they almost could, like you use the word proactive, because everybody is almost like you say, kind of in that sort of reactive whack-a-mole sort of mode.
Yes.
And it's everybody's like, you get rewarded for looking like you're busy and doing stuff, rather than actually standing around observing and thinking, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but going back to the word that you mentioned before, prium, which I'm glad to say I can pronounce correctly. And it's kind of its origin from from chess. But I know that also in the book you kind of talk about the most common customer experience kind of priums. And I wonder if you could give us kind of like a flavor of kind of like what are some of the most common ones, give people almost like a heads up in terms of, here's some of the things that many organizations suffer from. You might not necessarily know about them, but they're some of the most common ones you need to pay attention to, or should be going looking for.
Yeah, and the great thing about these patterns is that everybody will know them. You know, when you describe them, we may not have the same language, but we all, as humans, know because they are in violation of our human needs. The human needs that I track, I did. So there's all these different models out on what are the core human needs, and it's so funny how all the experts disagree with one another. Gadsard, he's an evolutionary psychologist, so he has a set that he uses. The Boston Consulting Group did a study, and they found, their own particular set of needs. And there's famous theories like self-determination theory. And so what I did is I did a whole bunch of research on this and collected them together and said, and again, this kind of goes back to patterns. Can I see any clear patterns that are emerging? And so what I found is that the pattern tends to be that we have a tension between wanting to stand out and elevate our status and wanting to fit in with the group and be safe with belonging. And that definitely seems to be a clear tension. We have another tension that exists between exploration of our environment and feeling safe. So we tend not to want to explore until we feel safe. And you can use that little nugget of knowledge if you ever want to increase donations, for example. If you're doing fundraising, just remind people how secure they are in their own lives. Before you ask for the donations, they'll feel more happy to explore those options. And then around that, you have the need for certainty and the need to predict the environment. So that kind of forms our core needs. We do have drives that sit below those, the drives to survive and the drives to reproduce, but they don't really pop up in customer experience very much because the other drives have pretty much evolved to be proxy drives that sit on top of those. So we really only need to concern ourselves with the status, belonging, the exploration, the certainty, and the need to control. So we look at that in the context of the patterns and how they violate. So let's look at some of them. So one of them, and the most probably the one that your listeners will know the most, is what I call the overly long wait. And so the overly long wait is when you get in line, or it could be virtually in line or physically in line. Maybe you're at the restaurant, you've just ordered, and a certain amount of time goes by, and then you start to get fidgety. And there's no exact time, and it's different for everybody else. And that fidgetiness starts to become irritation. And then at that point, the experience starts to become bad. And the reason that happens is because when you're engaging in an experience, let's say it's where you order your food, every other previous experience you've ever had kind of gets aggregated in your mind so that your brain can predict what it's going to be like. And if the prediction is accurate, then, it's a good experience. If the prediction is not accurate because they were quick, let's say, then, that was unusual. That was different. You get a little hit of dopamine, and that's pleasantly surprising. However, you've got to be careful if you're the business that did that, because next time the person comes in, they might be expecting the same level of experience. The opposite, of course, is when the experience is not what you predicted and it's way longer. That's when it becomes a bad experience. And the reason for that is because our body is constantly trying to predict the environment around it. It's a process called allostasis, and that's pretty much because all of the creatures that made it to where we are now, if you think about it, each one of us is at the end of a chain of a number of ancestors that go right back to the very first life form, each one of those successfully reproduced. And they did so because they were able to anticipate and predict the environment better than their competitors, within the environment. So that's kind of the evolutionary background for that one. And that holds true for every other bad experience as well. So we'll look at one other one. Let's take hide and seek. So hide and seek is a pattern where you want to contact a business and they're actively hiding from you. It could be that they just badly designed their website. They didn't put the contact us link somewhere, or maybe they don't have the right channel that you want, or maybe you call them up and no one's answering, no one's returning your phone calls. I had this recently with a health provider, and I emailed them and I said, I want to know if you're taking new patient. And if you are, I'd like to come in and meet with you. No response whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's a bit of goal friction in there because they're getting in the way of me getting to my goal, but also there's a bit of social friction. Did they get my email and just snub me? Sure. So you never know. But all the patterns tend to have that kind of either a bit of goal friction or a bit of social friction. The purest form of goal friction is the pattern called the block. So basically, you're trying to get something accomplished, and the business flat out just says, "No, we're not going to work with you." Yeah. And I've got an example of that in my book where I went to check in at a hotel and they wouldn't accept my debit card. And I was in Scotland at this point, miles away from home, having just flown. And there wasn't any attempt to even have a discussion. It was like, no, that's not acceptable. And then like a brick wall. And luckily I had some colleagues with me that had credit cards that were able to reserve my room for me. But yeah, that's one of the most irritating ones because it literally just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah, I had a bit of an example of that recently where I tried to send some flowers to my sibling kind of like for their birthday, and they were overseas, and rather than trying to send it from the UK, I tried to use it like a more local supplier.
Yeah.
And they sent me a tracking number and so on and so forth. And then this was arriving a certain day, and then I didn't get a notification to say that they'd be delivered or not. So I was a bit like a day or so kind of later, I was like, that's a bit odd. I haven't heard from them. So I kind of followed up, looked up the tracking number, went to the tracking kind of site, and then kind of like clicked on it and kind of went through it. And then it went unable to deliver for incomplete address. And I'm a bit like, well, thanks for letting me know. So I got straight on to kind of, I had to look around for the customer service kind of like thing on their website, eventually found some, sent them notes and kind of said, I see there's an incomplete address. Here's the kind of the complete address, any way that you could kind of arrange for redelivery. They come back and they said, no, according to our terms and conditions, it was an incomplete address, then we can't do a redelivery and we can't give you a refund or anything like that. And I'm a bit like, that's not acceptable. I mean, so basically you're saying to me, I've paid something, you haven't informed me kind of like that there's something wrong and give me a chance to rectify it. Oh, and by the way, here's a quote from the bottom of the receipt that you said that we'll do our utmost to kind of make sure that everything goes well, blah, blah, blah. And they were like going, no, that's our T's and C's, bosh. They wouldn't kind of budge, which goes back to that whole stress testing policy.
Yeah, policy over people. Yeah.
Yeah. And it took for me to go and search out the name of their chief revenue officer, their GM, and also their chief marketing officer. And I sent them a PDF record of the email to the service correspondence that I had. And I sent them all the same message and say, for a company that prides themselves on providing good service and a good experience, do you think this is acceptable? And the GM comes back to me very quickly and says, sorry for the inconvenience. I'll get one of my team onto that kind of as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. Here's the interesting thing. Nobody actually got back to me. All I got was a notification of a refund. Oh. And then to make things even better, then they sent me an email because that ticket then got closed, inviting me to complete a survey to see how they're done. Couldn't make this shit up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like wrong on so many levels.
Yeah. I was wondering if that's where you were going. I was like, oh no, please don't tell me they followed up with a survey.
Like going, wow. And I'm like going, I'm going to tell Michael that story because I'm sure there's kind of like a whole list of pre-owns in that.
Oh man, they violated. So they violated policy over people for sure. They violated without a paddle. So that's basically where the business puts you in a situation that's bad and then says, "Oh well, sucks to be you." There's hide and seek is in there where you couldn't find the contact information. And then monologue was the one you got hit with at the end. So that's where rather than wanting to have a conversation with you, they just basically want to talk at you, which is what a lot of surveys really are doing. Yeah. They're not really inviting your feedback. So you got hit with a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, and I just thought it was, I mean, it was a bit like, wow, these things don't happen very often, but when they do, it's like, wow, you could write a whole book about it.
Yeah.
So on these kind of pre-owned sort of things, I mean, how many have you been able to identify?
Well, here's the weird part is I tallied them up the other day and there's 18 of them in my book, which is really weird because the first book I ever wrote, which is this was written very quickly. It's just an exam prep book for the CCXP. Mm-hmm. That has 18 principles in as well.
Right.
So they both have 18, but it wasn't by design. What it was I went and just did research and sort of would this be a pattern or would this be part of an existing one? And I whiteboarded them all. And I guess it just wound up being 18, but they're by no means exhaustive. Like I'll give a quick example. One that isn't in my book is the one where the company decides to get political. And that's another one that I would advise against, because as soon as you do that, as soon as you pick a side and you go all in on it, then you've just alienated the other half of your customer base. It normally splits 50-50. Maybe some people will be like, well, I don't really care. I really need that service anyway. But there'll be the hardcore political folks, maybe 20% of the audience who are like, okay, I'm done with that company. I'm no longer shopping with them. So that's another one. And there's lots of different ones out there. But I thought what I would do is I just go for the most common ones that I see cropping up more and more and more. And then with the iceberg model, at least the readers are equipped to go out and find their own pre-owns, because I'm sure when you start getting into specific verticals, there'll be ones that are very specific to those verticals and those industries. But at the broader sense, just to give an introduction to this new field, the 18 that I got, I think are pretty good. I think they cover the vast majority of situations.
And can they be grouped into like almost clusters?
Maybe. I never thought about if I could group them into clusters, which is funny because that's how my brain works. Like today I was looking at a model of, what was it? It was some influencer circle that someone had created with the different drives that people have to do something or other. I can't remember the specifics of it. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, that looks like it maps really nicely onto the clustering of the human needs that I talked to you about earlier on. And I mentioned it to the guys on LinkedIn. Overlaps really nicely. And I see this all the time, like the competing values framework, for example, has 4 quadrants of like kind of personality type that a business can have based on its culture. And then I read a book called Predictable Success, and the author notes that there are these like 3 predominant personality types that tend to come in different ratios depending on the life cycle of a business and whether it's doing well or struggling. And I immediately saw the relationship with the competing values framework. So there may be a clustering out there, but I've not done that analysis yet. But I'll definitely go and take a look at that and see if maybe we could cluster them into groups.
Yeah, no, it's good to think about, because I think in the book you talk about root cause categories, and I wonder if that was kind of almost the same thing, that you can, I'm not proportioning kind of blame, as it were, but it's almost like giving people clues about where to look. Is this something that sits in tech, or does it sits in policy, or does it sit in marketing or service, or kind of wherever? And I just wondered if that's a way that you could classify them. But well, maybe that's kind of like second edition stuff. So, Michael, I mean, those are 18 kind of different things, and it's like it's soaked in good solid kind of research, whether it's kind of business and organizational kind of like research, or it's kind of like human psychology, social science sort of like stuff. So there's a lot in there, and there's kind of 18 kind of pre-ums, and the description there of them, and kind of what people can do to help them identify them, and can find them, and so on and so forth. But hopefully that gives people a flavor of the book. But I mean, before we move on to kind of, so I can ask you a kind of couple of just more general kind of questions to wrap up. Is there anything about the book that you'd like to kind of highlight, apart from the fact that all proceeds are going to a local kind of dog charity, which I think is brilliant? Anything you want to highlight that we've missed out?
I think we've covered most of it. Yeah, the dog stuff's very interesting. I got involved in this when I found a beagle on the side of the road in 2015, and never really. I mean, I always wanted a dog, but it was just one of those things. We were just like trying to find the right time where we had financial stability, and unfortunately, with that one job where they were threatening to fire people left, right, and centre, it's horribly managed company. We just didn't feel safe doing it. But of course, he got thrown into our laps by fate when we found him in the road. And then once things stabilized, we got a few more. And we always get rescue dogs. And I do a lot of work with the rescue charities here. I started off by doing transport. That's how most people get into it. So you transport dogs from kill shelters to rescues, or from a rescue to a foster event, that kind of thing. And then some people just donate. They don't want to get too involved with it because it can be quite emotionally crippling. But with the dogs, I found something really interesting as part of the research into my book that I want to tell you about. So I mentioned earlier that we have this tension between exploration and safety. I first learned of this in a book called Alive at Work. By I think it's Dan Cable was the name of the author.
Right.
And I put it to the test because, animals, especially social animals that run in packs, should really operate on a fundamental level the same way that we do. So I had this rescue dog named Diva that had come in from Georgia, and we were fostering her. Now, Diva was a very dangerous dog. She wouldn't want to go after another dog if she saw it across the road, but if any dog approached her, she would go crazy and would be willing to do what it took to get rid of the other dog. She was very dangerous. And we were trying to find ways to socialize her. And I just read Alive at Work. So I come up with this theory. So I got a friend of mine to walk my dog, Mac, and I walked Diva, and we walked with a gap between us. And as soon as Diva saw my dog Mac again, she went into fight mode, and she was angry and was like, "Don't you come near me." And then I walked with my friend walked with Mac a little bit ahead of us, and Diva walked behind at a distance. And what we were trying to do was see if we could bring that tension down so that she started to feel safer and safer and safer. And my theory was that if I was correct, what would then happen is that she would then feel the exploration drive start to kick in, and she would want to become curious about the other dogs on her own terms. And it worked exactly that way. And it ended up with her walking all the way over to my dog, walking next to her, and then licking my dog in the face as well.
Right.
Now, we couldn't, it wasn't like, okay, problem solved, we can put the two of them in the same house unsupervised. She had some very dangerous triggers, so she always had to be kept separated. But I love testing theories out with the animal world, because the animal world actually where we came from anyway. Mm-hmm. And I know those drives are all fundamental to most social creatures. So it's always fun to look at that stuff from that perspective, to try and validate the theories and see whether they hold up or not. And that was one really great example that I thought I'd share with your listeners. But all of that stuff's in the book. And like you said, all the royalties go to charities. They're local charities that basically deal with pulling dogs out of bad situations and getting them rehomed. And I've put some examples in Appendix A if anyone wants to know more about that.
Nice. That's awesome. So let's kind of zoom out a little bit. Done the book, but you also kind of like you've been working in the CX space for a while. I wanted to just get your take on a couple of things, if I may. First of all, I wanted to ask you, so from your perspective and what you're seeing and kind of what you're hearing, what you're experiencing yourself, I mean, what does the future of service and experience look like for you? And sort of what do you think some of the big hurdles are going to be that we need to kind of navigate if we're going to sort of succeed to produce the outcomes that we all desire to produce?
So what I'm seeing is there seems to be a lot of action on both the accelerator and the brake pedal in terms of making progress in the CX space. One of the guys I follow on LinkedIn, his name is Alex Mead. He's always, he might come across as a cynical guy, but I think he's just a realist. and he's always pointing out where things are going wrong and where there were high expectations and they didn't play out. And I think the thing that might help us, but it's going to take a real big mind shift change in the CX community, is to start appreciating customer experience for what it is, which is it's something that's complex. It's not complicated. A lot of people think that CX is complicated, meaning that, like a car engine, it needs a lot of experts to come in to understand its intricacies, but you can understand it. You can understand the cause and effect. And then you just need to pull the right levers at the right time and everything's going to work out perfectly. And by just accepting, look, we can't really understand always the cause and effect, because we're dealing with multiple things interacting with one another, intricacies well beyond the understanding of any single expert. If we just accept that it's a complex system and just let it go, then I think that's going to be the beginning. That's almost like the moment where the alcoholic says, okay, I need to change something. This is what I've been doing isn't working. So now I need to get on a path to recovery, and I don't know all the answers. So I'm just going to like accept the situation and turn it over to, something bigger than myself. And when you do that in CX, the way to do that is to accept complexity theory. And you mentioned two models earlier on. Another model I would recommend is Dave Snowden's model called the Kinetic model. And all he basically says is, when you're in a situation that's complex, you basically just got to probe. So you probe, you observe, and then you act. And so you take this kind of strategy of making little changes in the environment, seeing what happens. So he calls them safe to fail experiments, safe to fail probes.
Yeah,
making those kind of little tweaks, and I think that it comes with a lot of humility, because you're not trying to say, I know all the answers, I can solve everything. I had a really good experience yesterday with a local vet who's giving us on our dog. She's a holistic vet, and I asked her some pretty pressing questions. And the thing that impressed me the most was on two of the questions, her answer was, I don't know, I'd need to do some more research for you in that. Yeah. And that really made me have a lot more respect for her, because rather than feeling she had to give me an answer, she was just actually being completely honest. Look, it's a very complex field. I don't understand that area, but I'll do some research and I'll tell you what I find out. I love that. And I think that approach is probably what's going to help us best in the future with CX.
Absolutely. And so do you think that, I'm not going to presuppose kind of like your answer to the next question, because what I wanted to do is then ask you another one, which is like, well, if you, like we talked about, CX is complex, right? It's a big old field. We're dealing with complex systems. I mean, if you were to boil it all down, I mean, what would be your best advice to someone listening to this that wants to improve the service or experience that they deliver to their, whether it's to their customers, to their clients, to their patients, to their citizens, kind of to whoever? What would it be?
So the best advice, and it's very simple, it almost feels insulting to say it to people. And a lot of people, I think, know this. They just are restrained because of the power structures within the organizations they operate in. I certainly was at the school district, but the best advice is listen to the customer and then act and change what needs to be changed. There's a book coming out soon. It's not out yet. It's called What Customers Hate by Nicholas Webb. He wrote a really good book called What Customers Crave. This is like his dark side version of that book.
Right.
And in the book, he said, haters are the ultimate form of building insight. So basically go out to people, ask them what it is that they really hate, and then fix it.
Yeah. I mean, I have a story that I tell. This is related to me by the CEO of a company called. He's no longer CEO. I think the company's been sold. But at the time he was the CEO of a company called Big Ass Fans. I think they're in Kentucky actually, and guess they make big ass fans, and they grew their business sixfold over the course of about 5 years, I think it was, by essentially doing one thing. And they went out to their customers and they built a whole team around it. It started with one guy, And Kerry kind of turned around to him, and I forget the guy's kind of name, but he basically said to us, like, I pay your salary, but you don't work for me. You work for our customers. And I want you to go and find out kind of what they don't like and bring it back to us, and we'll fix it. And I've sort of taken the kind of the approach and almost formulated it into a question, because it's designed to kind of uncover some of the non-obvious stuff, as it were. And I said, the question I think that I always encourage people to ask their customers is, when they go out and listen to them, is there anything that we do, however small or slight, that annoys or irritates you?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes customers only tell you about the big things, but it's like that kind of, when you put a kind of like that, remember that sort of thought kind of experiment or thing that we we're going to talk about? How do you fill kind of like this big glass? You put the big rocks in, you put the little pebbles in, you put the sand in.
Yes, the one, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you remember that one? So it's almost like people quickly identify the big rocks, but they forget sometimes the little pebbles and then the sand and everything else. But sometimes they take up a huge amount of space. By asking your customers to identify those small things that they may think are inconsequential, and you take all those things and you act on them, that drove their business from, I think it was from $35 million turnover kind of revenue kind of per year to 175 over the course of kind of like 5 or 6 years.
Well, I really love that.
Did just that because it gave them insight across their whole business, everything from installation instructions to design and packaging to service to marketing to the whole thing.
It might be one of the most brilliant insights I've ever heard. I really like it.
Yeah, it's just, they were just relentless about it. And it was just, but they're incredible rocket fuel type of thing, but it's so simple that it's just about executing it. I mean, all the insight is all there. You just need to go, as you say, you just need to go and find it.
Yes.
Awesome. I learned that because I had him on the podcast, and it was brilliant. It blew my mind when I heard that story. It's awesome. Anyway, before we go, a couple of final kind of questions that I've been just to bookend the conversation, because, and it's related to some of the books and the work that I've been kind of doing, and I've been asking these questions to people. Everybody I've talked to on the podcast, pretty much everybody, and it's related to the sort of Punk CX and the Punk XL kind of books. Punk CX is Punk Customer Experience. Punk XL is the new one, which just came out in late 21, which explores this idea about what experience leadership looks like at a holistic level. So the two questions I'd like to ask is, first of all, what one word or one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
So, I thought it was only going to be one word, but if I can use two words, that might help as well.
There you go.
Question everything is the phrase that I would use.
Love it.
I think that it's very dangerous to get settled in, like even with a complex system, you can find the right answer, but then the right answer may not be the right year or two.
Yeah.
Maybe you've designed an experience that's really good, and then because of what they call the hedonic treadmill, people just kind of like, okay, well, that's just the standard thing now. It's like, it's nothing special.
Yes.
And so you can't assume that like pulling the one lever is going to give you the same output every time. So yeah, just constantly be questioning everything and challenging everything. And hopefully you're in an organization where you can do that safely and people understand it's not personal, that we're all there for the same end goal, which is to, help the customers have great experiences so the business can thrive.
Excellent. I like it. Thank you. And then the second one is, what company or brand do you think is an experienced leader and why?
So this is probably, I'm guessing you've never had this answer before to this question. At least I hope you haven't, because I kind of try to be as original as I can.
There you go.
I don't think any company is an experienced leader. And the reason I say that is because every time I find a company that I think, oh my God, like they did such a good job there, they always do something that lets them down. And I liken it kind of like to marriage, because like the relationships that we have with businesses, yeah, they're strong, but they're never going to be as strong as a relationship you have with someone when you ask them to marry you. However, even though you've had all of those positive experiences and emotions that have led to that moment, so many marriages still end in divorce. And again, this comes back to the whole idea that it doesn't matter really what led up to it. Anything that could be classed an experienced leader can be broken at any moment by a really bad experience. Mm-hmm. And I find that no matter what businesses I work with, even Amazon, who is still one of the best ones, there's always something that they can do that completely ruins the experience. So I don't want to get comfortable by saying that anybody's an experienced leader. I think that everybody is riding the experience wave, and some people are maybe a little further ahead than others, but at any moment someone could fall off their surfboard if the wave catches them out unexpectedly. So just stay on your toes and stay vigilant, and be as humble as you can.
Awesome. I love that. I mean, I think it's a bit like I do it slightly tongue in cheek, and I because with the punk CX thing, I was like, well, do I want to call myself a punk? And I'm like going, well, I'm a fan of punk music. So yeah, technically I am sort of in that sort of punk space, but in an experience space, I'm like going, So I called myself an aspirant punk.
Oh, I like it. Ian Golding called himself chief agitator. And I loved that phrase.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's that sort of thing. It's almost a bit like you're kind of, you're not coming with the answer, as it were. You're just kind of like, like an adjutant.
Yes.
Excellent. Michael, that's all I have for today. And so what I wanted to do is just say thank you for sharing your time and your insight and your expertise with us today. And congratulations on your success to date, the work that you do, and also on the new book. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a really interesting sort of take, and adds some new kind of like language to the discussion. So, and also congratulations on the kind of the work that you do with the dogs. I mean, it's like dogs are great, and so fair play to that. So thank you very much.
I wish every human being could understand the value of just having a dog. If you're allergic, I can understand it, but there are people out there that don't do it, and I think it changed my life. And I want to say thank you to you as well for, from the moment that I announced that I was getting ready to publish this book, you were the first person that contacted me and asked me to come on your show, and you've been very enthusiastic about this conversation for a long time. So I like fellow people that are interested in trying to come up with new and original ways of looking at things. So I feel a lot of connection with you there. So thank you so much, Adrian. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do, actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.